Hello, everyone. Welcome to On the Front Lines with Ashif Shaikh. We're so glad to have him join us today. Before we kick off, a few housekeeping notes. We are multi-streaming to Facebook, Twitch, Periscope, YouTube. So please share your questions on whatever platform you are consuming this content in, and we would be happy to direct that content and direct those questions towards Ashif, and we'll get to all of them as much as we can. I think, Rishabh, perhaps you can just set the context as to why we're doing this, and we'll take it from there.
First of all, welcome Ashif Bhai to this webinar called On the Front Lines.
Thank you.
This is being hosted in partnership with EgoMonk, and we have a Indian Sign Language translator with us who will also be translating the content as we go along during this webinar. Today, we would like to talk about the situation of migrant labor in the country. For the last very many weeks, we've been hearing about how migrant labor has been stuck in different parts of the country, how they're hungry, how they're without wages. Sometimes they're being attacked by the police. Sometimes we see these distressing videos of them starting to walk from Delhi to Jhansi to various parts of central and northern India. And we'd like to know what has really happened. And we know that Jan Sahas has been responding to the needs of these people across the country, including operating several helplines for migrant labor who are in various parts of India. So ever since the outbreak and the announcement of the lockdown, tell us, Ashif Bhai, what has kept you busy? What have you been doing?
Okay, so basically, like last 3 weeks were very busy for us, and my entire team is engaged to respond the current situation, and particularly in India, like various kind of social groups or vulnerable communities living here in our country. But particularly, like the migrant communities are very vulnerable in this current situation, because they are not staying in their source location, in their native places. They are currently in the destination, particularly in the big cities like Delhi, Bombay, Pune, Bangalore. And in these big cities, they are not able to arrange the food, and they are not able to fulfill the basic needs. Most of these, like the migrant workers, are depend on the contractors, and the contractors are not able to provide like the food or the other emergency like the services in this particularly period of time. And basically, if you see the numbers, so in India, some like the survey says about 14 crore like the migrant workers are like working in the cities. They basically come from the like the rural areas, small like the towns or the villages, and they are working in the construction field or in other unorganized sector kind of work they are doing in the big cities. So that's a huge number, actually, the 14 crore. So that's the one point. The another issue within this 14 crore, about 5 crore like the workers engage in the construction industry. So as you know, construction industry is not very much organized. Some laws are available, particularly like the BOCW Act. BOCW Act is providing various kind of like support to the construction worker, and BOCW Act is also try to ensure the welfare related activities of the construction worker. But if you see in India, very few states are there where a large number of population or construction workers are registered under the BOCW. So BOCW means Building and Other Construction Worker Welfare Act. And under this act, government set up like the boards at a state level. Government also collect the sales from the industry or particularly from the developers. As of now, we have about like 35,000 crore rupees under the like the BOCW SAFE fund. As you know, about a 3 week ago, finance minister announced that they will use that 35,000 crore rupees for the rehabilitation, for the like emergency support to the construction worker. So these kind of things are going on. So, after the lockdown announcement, the civil society organization initiated some processes. Government also announced this 35,000 crore rupees package. Like the worker unions and some other groups doing lots of things. But the biggest question is ki, nobody is very intensively thinking about the dignity of the labor. And basically, if you see, various cases are there across India where the communities and the larger society and our system deny the dignity of the workers, particularly workers who are involved in the unorganized sector. So as Rishabh ji mentioned, various the issues or the things happened in last 3 weeks. But the first thing I wanted to highlight issues related to the dignity of these workers. These workers from the unorganized sector, they build our airports, they build our cities, they build our highways. We use these all the infrastructure in our day-to-day life, but we are not able to give respect to them. So I think respect and the dignity is a very important thing. The second thing is ki in our legal system or our administrative system, as I mentioned, very few the communities and the workers are registered under the BOCW. So if you see the government data, about 3.5 crore people, or particularly like the workers registered under the BOCW from last 2 decades, because the BOCW Act passed by the central government in 1996. So we have all completed about the 23 or 24 years. In these last 23 24 years, we are not able to cover all the workers, particularly for the registration, and because we have various kind of entitlements also there in the BOCW, so we are not able to provide that entitlements also to the workers. So these two issues are very important, like the dignity and the registration and the delivery of the entitlement. But if you see in last 23 years, we are not identify the proper issues or actually the concrete solutions. So if you see, most of the construction workers come from a rural area. They are a migrant worker, and they need to register themselves in the source, and they work at the destination. And in these both the location, two different state governments ruling the state, two different state boards are there, and these state boards are not able to provide entitlement properly, because they are thinking these labor come from the different states, so they can go back to their state to claim their entitlements. And these entitlements are very basic. So basically, if any the worker face any kind of a problem at the workplace, particularly like the accident, or if the pregnant women are there in the families, so some entitlements are there for the pregnant women. Like some scholarship provisions are also there under the BOCW, the fund. So these are the very very basic things, but the workers are not able to claim these things because they are registered at the source and they are working in the destination. So this is a very important issue, and basically many people suggest from last 2 decades some portability system we need to introduce in the registration, but we are not able to crack that problem. The third issue I wanted to tell you, the engagement of the industry. So basically, the whole case comes from the industry's pocket. So if any industry want to involve in the infrastructure project, they need to give 1% say of the whole the budget of the infrastructure project to the BOCW says, and no any mechanism particularly for the transparency and accountabilities exist for the utilization of these funds. So as if you can see the records, if you see the information about the utilization of these funds, so many times these funds go to the some different activity, and these kind of activities are not connected for the worker welfare. So these issues are also there. So basically, we are working with the migrant workers from last many years, and we try to develop some solutions. So we piloted one solution, and that solution called LMT system. So it's a longitude migration tracking system, and we like use this system in one like the source location and one like the destination location, and it's a whole like the corridor of source and destination. So it's the first thing, and now like we collected a huge data under this LMT system. The second thing, we also try to develop a helpline for the workers. Yeah, so if any worker like go from the source to the destination, and in between like at the transit point, if they face any kind of problem, they can call us, they can connect us, and then we provide all like the services related to the legal support, related to the emergency support, or these kind of support we are offering under the helpline. The third thing, we also provide some kind of like the training and orientation support to the migrant worker, so they can like get more concrete information about the wages, issues related to the wages. So what kind of like the minimum wage there in Delhi or in other like the destination locations. So these kind of program are going on. But in last 3 weeks, we as an organization and our entire team face a tremendous level of problems, because we are not able to deliver sometime the services to the workers because the demand is very high. Hundreds, a thousand people facing like the basic need related problem like the food or health related things or shelter related issues. Like our team continuously like engage with these construction workers, but sometimes we are not able to provide services to them. Like the sensitivity in the our system and in our like the society is very less. So I think we need to increase the sensitivity about the construction worker or the like the migrant worker. It's very very important. If you see the 2018 judgment of the Supreme Court, and that judgment called Justice Lokur judgment. And in that judgment, the Supreme Court very clearly like raised all these points related to the migrant worker, related to the construction worker. But we as society, we are not able to like address these questions. And these questions are very not like very common question, very basic question related to the dignity, question related to the protection of these workers. So, like we have various like the law. If you see the Interstate Migration Act, Contract Labor Act, BOCW Act. So these acts and the legislations are available, but we are not able to like implement these like the laws. A labor department is basically like responsible to implement all these legal provisions and the like the action plan. But if you see the human resource allocation in the labor department is very less. So I think like it's not issue related to the shaming, but it's a issue related to the identification of the like the important issues and the problem, and develop some kind of solutions. So as per our understanding, we need to like develop some kind of like the collective action program. And in these kind of collective action program, we need to engage with the private sector, particularly like the companies and the companies who are hiring these migrant workers. The second thing, we need to work very closely, very intensively with the government system, for example, like the labor department, BOCW boards, and the some other authorities. And the third thing, we need to work with the like the philanthropy, CSR, unions, and the civil society organizations. And most importantly, engagement or the active participation of the worker community, because all these issues are related to them, and their active engagement or the participation is also very important. So I think this collective action is a very important thing. The second thing is the technology, how we can introduce a powerful technology solutions, particularly for the tracking. Because if the 14 crore people in every season, if they like migrate from one place to the another place, and their tracking is a very very important to deliver all the social security program, all the entitlement, and ensure the protection of these workers. So the technology thing is very important. And third thing, I think the political will to ensure these like the protection and security and create a safety net for the migrant worker is also very important. And under this political will, I am not saying like the like more budget is required. We have at some level, like under the BOCW, we have like 35,000 crore rupees, but we are not able to utilize properly that kind of fund. So I think effective like the planning, effective collaboration, and the effective implementation is also very important, like the component. So this is my ideas basically related to the ensuring protection and the welfare of the migrant workers. Recently, we did a study actually after the lockdown, and under this study, we basically interviewed 3,196 migrant workers, and basically we conduct a telephonic interview with them, and we collect some information related to their livelihood, their income, their the food security related issues, and we got lots of information. So my colleague is also joined in this call. Her name is Arya, and she was responsible for to conduct the whole this study. So she will also share some of the the insights, some of the recommendations, some of the findings of our study.
So, Ashif bhai, before we move to detailing the findings of the study, I think it will be useful for our audience to understand some of the things that you've said. Especially some of these questions, some of these things are things that I don't think is available as common knowledge. To begin with, one of the questions that we have is that all of these laborers who migrate, are these all people who are in the unorganized sector, or also some of them are in the organized sector? And is the level of impact different on the people who are in the organized sector, and is the impact different for people in the unorganized sector?
So if you see,
and also would be useful if you could tell us what are some of the examples of the organized sector, and what would be some examples of being in the unorganized sector?
Yeah. So, particularly if you see the case of the migrant worker, so most of the migrant worker are engaged in the with the unorganized sector, and these migrant worker mostly come work on a seasonal basis. So it's a seasonal migration from the rural India to the urban India, right? So and in the the unorganized sector, they are engaged at large amount of the number of people engaged in the construction supply chain. So in the construction supply chain, building construction is a one thing, but if you see the bricklin industry, if you see the cement industry, so the whole supply chain. So I don't have any concrete the numbers of census, but out of these 14 crore people, 5 crore these workers directly engage with the building and other construction activities, and about 4 crore the workers are engaged in the whole construction supply chain. So whole the construction industry is based on the the migrant worker. So migrant workers are engaged at a large number in the construction industry. And the second thing is the we have some other industries also, or other areas. For example, the apparel industry. So in apparel industry, at a large number, the migrant workers are involved, particularly the women migrant workers. And we have then some other the unorganized sector, like feriwala in the cities. So many people are come from the rural area, and they start their own businesses or small the shops and other things. So because they are engaged in the unorganized sector, so they are not able to get the social security schemes or social protection from the government side as well as from the employer side. The people who are engaged in the organized sector, so they are eligible to get a provident fund, ECI, and some other kind of the provisions are there in the government system, so they get that kind of benefit. So all if you see, they the people who are engaged in the unorganized sector, they work on a daily basis, they earn, and then they eat in the night. So no any social security, no any food security exists for the unorganized sectors, and that's why they are very vulnerable in the current situation.
So, would you say that some of these these migrant laborers who are in the unorganized sector, and also some of them who are in the organized sector, in the apparel industry, in the construction worker, in the construction supply chain, would you say some of them are also the urban homeless?
So if you see, why I'm again and again saying like the migrant worker are most vulnerable in this current situation, because like migrant worker is a one, like the definition, but within that multiple level of invisibility, multiple level of the discrimination or vulnerabilities exist, and it's related to the homelessness, related to the food insecurity, or no any social security, or like the safety net is exist. So these are the some examples, but the range of the problem or issues are there with the migrant workers. So if you see the people who are migrating from the Bundelkhand of Uttar Pradesh to Delhi NCR, for example, like Gurgaon or Noida, so it's very difficult for them to ensure the ICDS services, like the supplementary food from the government Anganwadi. Then it's very difficult to ensure the children of these their children's education, because all the documents or like the are there from in the like the source locations, and sometimes they have not spent the whole year in the destination, so they come in these cities for 6 months, 9 months, 7 months, then go back to their homes. Sometimes like the half of the family is living in the rural area, like the older people, children, and then the husband and wife is working in the like the destination location. So these kind of like very complicated issues are there, and that's why like multiple level or multiple type of vulnerabilities are there with the migrant worker.
Ashifji, a few questions. If you just zoom out of the problem, what is the state level sort of geographic breakdown? Do you have any sense of, are the migrant laborers concentrated in certain states that you've seen? Like where do they come from essentially?
Yeah. So as of now, we are working in some corridors. So one corridor, you can easily see like the migration from Bundelkhand to Delhi NCR, right? The another corridor from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar to Mumbai, and like suburban area of Mumbai, like Thane, Palghar, Vasai, Ulhasnagar, these areas. And then the corridor of the labor from the Chhattisgarh to Punjab and Haryana. So these kind of like 10 to 12 big corridors are there in India, and you can easily like identify these corridors. And in some corridors, most of the migrant workers going for the agriculture work. In some corridor, migrant workers are going for the construction work, or the apparel industry, or the bricklayer kind of work.
Okay.
So, Ashif bhai, a lot of civil society organizations have stepped up to feed meals to these laborers and unorganized sector workers who are stuck in cities or highways. The government came very late to the scene. Why do you think that happened? Is it because, like you said, in the various schemes that exist and in the various entitlements that exist, like the BOCW, which is the Building of Construction Workers Act, or the ICDS scheme, the Anganwadi scheme, which provides midday meals to children and pregnant women? Do you think the government didn't realize that there were so many migrant workers because they are not enrolled in these schemes? Or do you think in general, we did not recognize that these people exist as a large mass in our country? Because if 14 crore people are migrant laborers in the country, as you said, that's almost, close to a little less than 10% of our population, which is a big number. So why do you think they were excluded? And do you have any numbers to suggest if the government actually was able to reach, or if it was not able to reach, how many it was not able to reach? Do you have some data on that?
Yeah. So basically, as I mentioned, in last 2 decades, various kind of program policies or schemes introduced by the central government as well as by the various state governments. So BOCW is a one example, but if you see the Madhya Pradesh, so Madhya Pradesh government launched last year one program for the unorganized sector labor. Similar kind of program initiated by the Rajasthan government about 3 years ago. So various kind of programs are exist. So it's the truth. some budgets are also available at the state level and the national level. That's also true. But the biggest problem is no any tracking mechanism is exist. And when we discuss about the migrant labor, so the biggest challenge is to track the migrant labor. And in India, we are not able to track the this large number of the migrant workers, and we require real time data. So, for example, we want in this difficult time these last 2 weeks, if the government or any civil society organization or philanthropy or industry want to give some kind of support to the migrant worker, so for that purpose we required a real time data. How many people currently are living in Delhi or Mumbai, or how many people are living in the Bangalore. So if we have a real time data, then we can easily reach out to these communities, these workers, their families, and provide the required support. For example, like the food, shelter, like mobile balance. So these kind of support, any institution can offer or provide. But the biggest problem is we don't have any the real time data. We don't have any the very concrete the tracking system. So if you see the Interstate Migration Act, one provision is there in the Interstate Migration Act. When the workers migrate from the rural area, the panchayat should register all the migrant workers. They need to maintain a register. They need to update that register on a regular basis. But if you see at a panchayat level, no any panchayat is maintain these kind of very concrete the records. In some panchayats where the organizations or the proactive government officials are there, some exceptionals are there where the panchayats are doing this kind of activities. Otherwise, we don't have any very effective tracking mechanism. The second thing, portability is very important, as I mentioned previously. So if the migrant worker have some kind of the portability certificate or the passbook or card, if they are registered in the West Bengal, but if they are migrating to the Delhi NCR, so Delhi NCR administration should provide all the entitlement related to the BOCW or any other the entitlement related scheme. So that kind of portability mechanism is not exist under the current system. So these two things are very important for the identification, for the recognition of the migrant worker. And third, again, I want to raise the point we as a country, we are not able to provide all the required support system to the migrant worker, as we are providing to the other middle class people, the people who are working in the organized sector, in the offices, like the white collar job or some other the kind of work. But we are not recognizing the contribution of these communities in the nation building. So I think in India, the role of the migrant worker in the nation building is a very crucial, but we are not able to recognize. We are not able to identify these people properly, and that's why we are not giving the dignity and respect to these the individuals. And I think now the time is we need to change this whole the existing system, not in the government but society also, because many times the people are blaming to the government. Government is not able to providing these services. Definitely it's a role of the government, but at the same time, as a society, we have some kind of the responsibility. The people who are providing all kind of the services and support to our society, we need to give support to them also. And from the industry need to play a very crucial role, because industry is depend on the migrant workers. So I think their role is a very important. So industry also need to rethink and how they can protect the safety, security, and the welfare of these workers. So I think industry also rethink on these issues.
So Ashif, taking you've outlined some of the reasons why this migrant population has been excluded from relief efforts. Could you speak a little bit about what will be the effect on industry from this displaced population? Because as you mentioned, right, there's the apparel industry and other organized industries that rely on this group of people. So what will be the upstream consequence for business to continue post-lockdown?
Yeah. No, so I think, as you know, like the post, after this lockdown thing, or post lockdown, the biggest challenge will be like the crisis in the our economy, and basically the segment like the migrant worker, they play a very crucial role because of the workforce. So like the 14 crore people if involved in our like the whole like the Indian economy, their role is a very, very important. But if these people like migrate, reverse migrate from like the destination to their sources, and if they will not come back, then we face the tremendous level of problem about the workforce. So I think like we need to like initiate some kind of processes to secure or ensure the safety, security, food security, like the good living condition for the migrant worker, then they can come back and then they can work in the construction side, they can work with the industry. So I think it's a very, very important and crucial for the Indian economy. And I think it's not a very small thing. It's not related to the entitlement. It's not related to the wage of the migrant worker. It's a beyond of these small things. So I'm saying for the strengthening of the Indian economy and like the ensuring our economy will grow properly after the post lockdown. So I think the role of the migrant worker is a very, very important, and we don't wait actually. So industry don't wait for they can immediately initiate some kind of like the processes where the migrant worker feels safe, because currently if they are not feeling safe at the destination and they want to go back their home, then it would be a huge problem related to the workforce for the entire industry.
So a lot of corporates and a lot of people are, they're saying that they've spent 2% of their CSR. Some corporates have gone beyond spending, let's say, beyond the 2% limit. But often we hear from industry that, we've given our CSR money, we are exhausted, and there's only so much we can do. So are you suggesting that this problem is beyond, the social spending that companies are mandated to do? Do you think companies need to come together in some way to form a new way of looking at migrant labor?
So it's a very interesting question actually, and particularly in the current like the context, it's a very, very important thing. Key industry need to think about this issue. And many times when we discuss with the industry or like the industry representatives, most of the time people are thinking this issue is related to the CSR. And if any organization want to do something for the worker welfare, industry can contribute like the 2%. It's very important for the distribution of food and some other things. But actually, definitely, it's not related to the CSR. It's beyond the CSR, because if the industry, the whole industry is based on the workforce, and that workforce mostly like people come from the villages, and they are a migrant worker, and they are working in the unorganized sector, and the industry is depend on these workforce. So I think they need to do lots of things beyond the CSR, and these things are mostly related to the protection of the workers, safety of the workers. And if they can create an environment where the worker feels safe, ki I am here in Delhi, I am about a 700 kilometer I travel, and now I am in a one city, and I am working in the construction side, I am building the metro track. So I think for the contractor, for the developer, for the industry, I think it's a very clear cut responsibility that they can expend more money for the worker welfare. And I think in India the biggest problem is ki many times like the industry also investing like the money, but the problem is ki ethical like the recruitment process is not exist. So like if you see the big companies who are hiring like the thousand people for the for their infrastructure projects and other kind of projects, so they depend on the contractor, and these contractors are depend on the petty contractors. and these petty contractors are depend on the local contractor at the source level. So like the multiple people are involved in this whole supply chain, and I think if the industry can also work to clean the whole supply chain, and they can invest for cleaning the whole supply chain. They can invest for the ethical recruitment processes, where they can ensure like not only the minimum wages, but they can ensure like the living wages for the workers, and some other like the facilities or other services if the industry can ensure, particularly related to the food and nutrition of the children of their families, safety of the women at the workplace, like some other kind of like the entitlement from the government, because many times like the government initiates the program, for example like the BOCW program. These programs are very good, very effective, but because of the very less engagement from the industry side, these programs we are not able to implement effectively. So I think in these areas industry can play a very very important role, and these all areas are beyond the CSR.
Ashifji, just to double check, do you think policy comes first to encourage industry to make this decision, or do you think industry has to kickstart on this own? And then there's a follow-up question to that.
I think now the time is very difficult for all of us, and we can't wait for any kind of like the policy reform. Definitely, policy reform is a very important thing. But if the civil society, if the philanthropy or foundation or CSR or like the private sector wait for the policy changes, I think we can lose the whole like the momentum. So I think now the time is key. We can like plan, we can develop our own strategies, and then initiate work for the welfare of the worker, protection of the worker. That's one thing. The second thing, meanwhile we can also initiate some processes where we can develop some collective programs. So we will not only depend on the government, but if the industry can also come into the picture for the protection and welfare of the worker, and they can invest their resources, their infrastructure, government will also invest their resources, and local organization like the CBOs, CSOs, or like the worker unions, they can also contribute in this whole collective process.
Sure. So here a question just came in, which was says that our analysis and response to issues faced by migrants comes from often a strong male perspective. So the question is, how much of this migrant population is male versus female? Because the question comes, what about vulnerabilities of women, including sexual exploitation, that is often faced in construction industries and other ways? So how do we counter this? How do we get more female perspectives into dealing with this migrant population issue?
Yeah. So basically, if you see the whole our previous processes are male dominant processes, and in this unorganized sector, the role of the women is very important, because a tangible number of a percentage of the women workforce is also involved in the unorganized sector, particularly like the migrant workers. But when we conduct a survey, because it's a very important, in our survey about 5% women participated and 95% male members of the family responded. Why? Because the ownership of the phone with the male member of the family. So always male member of the family pick up the phone and respond all the questions. So these kind of like the practical problems are there, but definitely we need to develop some kind of like the program where we can sensitize the communities, particularly like the families of the migrant workers. But at the same time, we need to create some safety net at the industry level also, because we are running a helpline, like the 24/7 helpline for the migrant workers. And in this helpline, we receive lots of cases related to the violence or sexual violence of the migrant women workers. So as I mentioned, like if I am a migrant worker, my vulnerability is very high. But if I am a migrant worker and I am a woman, then my vulnerability is almost double.
Yes.
So I think this issue is a very very important. But as a civil society organization or the government institution or like the other initiatives, we always like lose that focus. And I think now we need to more and more focus on the women issues, and we can also see the whole issue in the with the gender lens also.
So Asif bhai, the government has also, the central government specifically, has announced a large stimulus package. When the lockdown, the first stage of the lockdown was in effect. My question is that the assumption is that this pandemic will not just be over after the lockdown, but it will have some long term impact, and it'll stay. We are also, I mean, there are also sort of predictions of a second wave of the pandemic. In that scenario, what is it that the government has done so far to address some of the challenges, both state and central, and what more is needed to provide immediate relief? Because one of the challenges we see is that the number of people who are impacted by this, like if we take the entire sector, 14 crore people who are impacted, and the number of people providing relief is disproportionate. It's not equal. There are many more people who need, and there are very few people who are able to do something, whether it's volunteers, whether it's cash relief. So what is it that institutions can do, particularly the government, the courts, the police, in order to support these populations through this period?
Yeah. So I think one very important like the learning is there about the impact, because most of the time when if you see in the news channels or news reports or any other academic discussion, most of the people are focusing on the long term economic impact. Like we will like face lots of like the economic crisis related issues in future because of this whole like the situation. But I think economic impact is the one thing, but the social impact and the emotional impact is also very important, particularly in the like context of the migrant worker. Why I am adding these two another point? Because if you see lots of incidents happen in last 3 weeks, and when the migrant worker hurt actually, because they not get like the respect or dignity, so their emotion it's a emotional hurt actually. And this will be not we can like overcome that kind of like the mental health related challenges in the over period of time, like the 6 months or year or 2 year or 3 year. It's a long term like impact on the like the migrant worker and their family members. So I think when we discuss about the impact, we can also refer the social impact, the like the emotional or mental health related impact also. And when we develop any kind of program, we need to like address these issues also. That's the one like the point I want to like raise. The second thing is the government made a very good announcement after the second day of lockdown, particularly they released a guideline for the states to use the BOCW fund for the migrant workers. 35,000 crore like the government like allocated. So basically, the entire fund government announced we will like the state boards can use for the welfare of the workers. And the same time, they also say about 3.5 crore like the workers are registered under the BOCW. So in that context, actually, every family got about like 1,000 rupees. If we can use the entire money, entire like the fund of the BOCW says, if we want to utilize and we have a 3.5 crore like the registered like the workers, then every worker gets 1,000 rupees only. So that fund is definitely not sufficient, but at the same time we like the systems are not exist. So we don't have any like the concrete data about the like the these 3.5 crore workers, like the data related to their bank information, their addresses, or some other things. And this data is about a 20-year ago. If somebody is registered under the BOCW, then we are still counting that person. And in some cases, that person is now no more. Many workers are not exist. They died because of their ages. And in last 20 years, we were not like verified the data. And in some states, we have a system of like re-registering or renewal of this your registration. So during the renewal, in some states, the renewal period is 1 year. In some states, renewal period is 2 year or 3 year. In some states, like the state government link the workers' bank account with the like BOCW card. In some states, we were not linked the card with the bank account information. So these kind of practical problems are also there. So if we will announce a huge amount of funding or like the budget for the welfare of the worker, but we don't have any system actually. So system, then we don't have any like the sufficient human resources. So if you see in entire India, we have more than 700 districts. In one district, about like three people are working in the labor department on a full-time basis. These three people are not able to manage like the million workers actually in a one district. So, like we need to change the entire system. We need to increase human resources. We need to increase the like the financial resources to build the system, and then we can allocate budget for the implementation of these schemes. So, we are not able to like complete the primary like the things, and now if we will announce anything, we are not able to deliver properly. So, I think the whole like this pipeline we need to develop, and then we can expend the money effectively. That's my the learning from last like the
Yeah.
So you're basically saying that we have a lot of policy measures in place across various kinds of institutions across the country, but we have no systems to follow up on that policy.
yeah.
And without those systems, any announcement of relief of any kind will mostly not reach people.
Yeah. So at some level, like the like particularly state governments utilize about 3,000 crore rupees for the like the workers, but that money mostly goes to the like the food and some other like the needs, like the requirement of the workers. But I think the BOCW objective is different. It's not only to serve the food to the workers. It's a beyond. It's a welfare actually. So welfare means like we need to work on the education of the workers. We need to work on their safety, their security, their like the social security, and various kind of like other provisions are also there. So I think we need to revisit the whole scheme. We need to like make some different kind of provision. And most importantly, I'm again and again like urging ki we need to engage all these stakeholders. All the stakeholders come together, sit together, and develop a comprehensive collective program. Then we can like make a very tangible impact in the community.
Ashif ji, what you've described seems like a leaky bucket, right? There are lots of holes in the system, and money can flow out. I just wanted to understand, is there actually a figure that you think monetarily that should our systems improve, that we should consider allocating? Because you've mentioned that this is a big shock, right, to the migrant population that might encourage reverse migration. So how much money do we actually need to throw at this problem and effectively reach, because 1,000 rupees per person is not enough should the problem run 2 or 3 months also. So how much money should we need? And this ties in also to the broader research that you've already done. If you could share more about your research as well.
Yeah. So basically, I'm not able to give you any concrete like the figure per se about the like the budget or like the funding is required. But I think we can see some like the good practices in the different states. So today I heard from like Telangana state, and they initiated a one like a pilot with the Tata Institute of Social Science, and they are conducting a one survey with the migrant workers. And this survey is a very interesting. It's a joint like initiative of the police and the Tata Institute. So I think these kind of like the pilots are very important to understand the local problem, or like to build an in-depth understanding of the issues related to the migrant workers. So that's very like a small thing, but I think it's a very very important like the initiative of the government and the like the police department and the Tata Institute. That's the one thing. The second thing, in the same state, they initiated a one like initiative for the food delivery to the migrant worker. And I think in this current situation, food distribution is a very very important for the survival of these communities. And some states are doing very well. So that's a very the second very important thing. The third thing, Delhi government announced 10,000 rupees like the support for each and every worker family. I'm not sure how many workers got that amount in their account, but the announcement is very positive because 10,000 is a tangible amount to for the survival of at least for a month or 1.5 months. So we can document these kind of good practices, and these practices initiated by the the government, by the joint venture of the government and other institutions. So that's a one point. The second point, in last 3 weeks in India, the startups also initiate lots of very unique and innovative processes. So for example, the cash transfer. So I know many small organizations, particularly like the for-profit ventures, they initiated processes for the cash transfer to the migrant workers. So I think these kind of ideas are also very important. We can study these kind of idea and then scale or replicate in other areas. The third thing I wanted to tell you, the community participation or the community support, because I am working with the migrant workers from last many years, but in this 3 weeks I realized in many places the communities come together to serve to the migrant workers, and they distribute the food, and many times they know they don't have any idea if these migrant workers are comes from which state, but they just want to support and fulfill the need of the migrant worker. So I received a call from Delhi, and some the association, the resident association, welfare association, they called us and they said we want to support 300 families. So actually 300 families come together. They basically put all their resources and they prepared a 300 kits for the migrant worker, and we facilitate that process and we distributed in the communities. So we basically just share the location, our contact, and we facilitate the distribution process. So these kind of good practices or good examples are also there from the society side. So I think my suggestion is if we will document all these good practices from the government side, from the private sector, from the community, from the academic institution, and then we can see which practice is more effective, more impactful, and then we can replicate across the India.
So you're suggesting very strongly, if I understand, that whatever has happened, and whatever things exist. But right now, there is a need to look at it from a very distinct lens of research, understand what elements of interventions work, and use them to scale it across to reach the maximum number of people possible. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, definitely. And to another point I also want to make, when we develop this kind of program, we will not fully depend on any one the stakeholder or actor. We always try if the multiple actors or institutions come together and then work on this issue, because it's not only related to the the government. The government can take a responsibility and do lots of the work for the the construction worker or migrant worker, or we can not fully depend on the industry case, their responsibility, because these workers are working for the industry, and we can't fully depend on the the philanthropy foundation, CSR, or the NGOs. So I think collective the effort, when we document and when we initiate the scaling up process or replication, all these stakeholders come together, and most important thing, accountability and transparency is a very important and very crucial to ensure the effective implementation of any of these kind of programs. So basically, if the government allocate, or if any other the institution allocate some amount of the funds for the welfare of workers, so I think we can same time we can ensure what kind of mechanism we can put in place for the accountability, and what kind of mechanism we can also ensure for the transparency. Anybody any can go and see the the record information about the utilization of funds or about the delivery of the entitlement or other services to the workers.
So I have before we close this conversation, I have two final questions for you. One is, yesterday one of our speakers very clearly said that it's not just cash or food that needs to reach people who are stuck right now. It's both cash and food. What is your view on that? Secondly, how can ordinary citizens at this time step up and help beyond providing immediate relief?
Yeah. So I think for the current time, definitely like the food support or like the medical kits or safety kits or like the financial support. And many times we realize like like 100 rupees mobile top up or mobile balance is also very important for the community or for the worker. So all these support are very, very important, and everybody need to like work on that aspect. But at the same time, we need to initiate some processes for a long term planning and long term like the support system for the migrant worker. And in this long term system, I think I want to highlight 3 points. One is the ethical recruitment process, because most of these workers come from some other places, and they are not able to negotiate many times, and sometimes they trap with the forced labor conditions, or they are not able to get the minimum wages. So these kind of situations are also they are facing many times. So I think ethical recruitment, like the system, we need to establish with support of the private sector as well as with the government. And in that system, like the role of the startups are very important, because if you see in India we have lots of startups, but it's very few are, and I am not able to identify. I only identify in India 2 startups, and these startups want to focus on the migrant workers or their recruitment processes. So I think we require 100,000 startups or small companies or big companies for the recruitment, ethical recruitment of the migrant workers. So that's the 1 point. The second point, I think again and again, I am like emphasis on the technology. How we can increase the use of the technology to solve this problem. Because without the technology, we are not able to solve this problem. So I think technology at all levels, technology for the tracking, technology for the registration of the worker, technology for delivering the entitlement or any other services. So that's the second point I wanted to make. The third point, like increase the human resources and then the financial resources in the government system is very important. So I think we can work or discuss the emergency needs of the community, but at the same time we can also initiate some processes to identify the bigger problem, bigger challenges, and try to solve the long term problem. And in this long term plan, we can focus not only issues related to the economy, but at the same time we can focus the social security of the worker, and how we can address the mental or like the emotional issues of the worker. So these all like the bigger issues are there, and I think if we will work together, we can solve this problem in next like 5 years or 6 years. But I think the collective effort is a very, very important to deal with this kind of problem and solve this kind of problem.
Thank you for this message of solidarity and for telling us to come together, not just to address immediate issues, but issues that face us once the lockdown is over. Sataj,
yes.
Would you?
So again, thank you, Ashif, for joining us and sharing your thoughts. I think this is a great moment to recognize that we have a problem and come together, but let's also not lose focus on the long-term goals of this community, and we owe it to such a large population base as well. Thank you again.